Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're logging on from in the world, and welcome to the latest Infrastructure Intelligence Live Friday webinar, organised in association with our strategic communications and events partner, BECG. Today, we're going to be discussing a very topical issue. It's an issue that we seem to be returning to very, very often as a construction and infrastructure sector, and that is the issue of digital. It's been said to be in the process of transforming our industry to a new and better way of working. It's affecting all aspects of the sector. It obviously has the potential to transform the way in which we not just construct and use infrastructure, but also how that infrastructure is developed into the future as well. We are fortunate to have with us three eminent speakers on all things digital. We have Richard Shannon from Mott MacDonald, we have Emily Scoons from Ramboll UK, and Mark Coates from Bentley Systems, who I will introduce in turn very shortly. Usual format applies on these occasions. If there are any questions that people have got, please post them in the chat. I already have a few up my sleeve anyway, and I'm sure our excellent speakers will be able to deal with those in due course. First of all, let me introduce our first speaker, and that's Richard Shannon, who is the Group Digital Delivery Director at Mott MacDonald. Now, Mott MacDonald, I think it's fair to say, are one of the firms in the construction and infrastructure sector who are at the cutting edge of the whole digital agenda. And Richard is responsible for bringing the potential of digital transformation to Mott MacDonald's clients on a worldwide scale. He's also sustainability and digital lead for Mott's built environment sector, and he's also the global BIM practice lead. It's interesting that we mention the environment in the context of digital as well, because as I'm sure we'll find out today, there are some very close links between those two aspects of our sector. Anyway, that's enough from me, Andy Walker, the editor of Infrastructure Intelligence. Over to Richard to make a few introductory remarks. Richard, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Andy, and hello everybody. So digital is at the centre of our group purpose, along with ultimately connection through to enhanced social outcomes, which is already making that connection through to sort of sustainability. So the two tie up very much together in the world of Mott MacDonald. So I'll just make a few introductory remarks about what we're doing about addressing the potential of digital transformation in the organisation. I think, first of all, we're very aware of the changing competitive landscape. We're all used to working together with similar kinds of organizations, and we all know that there's a lot of work to go around, and we often partner, we often compete, we often combine, and it's quite a familiar territory. And, I think when we talk to our clients, we find that amongst the sort of, that sort of group of engineers, there's not a huge sort of differential, really. They have better relationships with some better than others, and they try and work in partnership. So we're very familiar with that part of competitive landscape, but there's a new emerging competitive landscape, which is very relevant and important, I think, to the industry. And it comes from various directions. We find in the whole area of digital transformation, there's clearly a lot of activity coming from perhaps, the large management consultancies, this type of organization who may not have the same domain expertise, but, certainly have a lot of number crunching capability. And so in a way that sort of starts to influence winning work with some of our clients. We have got technology companies. We've got Mark here representing a technology company, but we find that in some cases clients look directly to technology for solutions, and in some cases that means that it becomes a competitive environment with technology companies themselves. And finally, the sort of disruptors, the startups, the unknowns, very difficult to sort of prepare for, because disruption by nature is a little bit unexpected. But we have clear evidence of new starters coming in and winning work. So we look very much at what are we going to do to address that. And our digital strategy starts with two primary elements. First is optimization, doing what we already do kind of better, more efficiently. So we have a strategy for augmented delivery, looking at standardization of process, automation, which effectively enables us to do what we already do for our clients better, cheaper, faster, and everybody's doing that. But the other key area for us is transformation. What new value propositions can we bring to Mott MacDonald clients based on digital? And I think this is, the key area for us to move things forward. It's about new value that can be extracted by clients by making better use of information and making better decisions. And we expand that through into potentially through life services and look at new business models whereby we get rewarded for the value that we add to information and provide information to clients in a new sort of permanently online way rather than a big chunky report every year which quickly goes out of date. So just wiring up clients' decision making to data, our data, live data, open data, and delivering it to them in new ways, which potentially brings new business models. And certainly that's something we've invested quite a lot in through our Moata platform, which is designed to do kind of exactly that. The other streams that we're really focusing on is, first of all, information-centric decision-making, both in our organization and in client organizations. I mean, I think we talk about sustainability and how we're going to create a better future, which is obviously where, our industry has a key role to play. And, my view is that if we had all of the right information at our fingertips when we're making a lot of decisions, well, A, we wouldn't have made a lot of decisions that we already made and sent us in wrong directions, and B, we would be able to make better decisions in the critical stage we're at now in terms of getting things right for the future. So driving better decision making by connecting up to reliable, live and well-interpreted information, I think is a key role for the industry. And that is a massive challenge. Sounds easy enough, but it's actually very hard to do. It's not just about providing information to the people in decision-making roles, but convincing them to act on that information rather than just act on, what they did last time or what somebody else told them. So yeah, and finally, just very quickly, I think the other key to our strategy is around partnering. We have an investment arm now in Mott MacDonald, which actually provides funding into startups, but that's only a small part of a bigger partnering strategy. I think to succeed in the industry, really, we need to convene different groups, different talents to build an ecosystem and to help our clients to get connected to the right technology when, they've got a sort of a wall of offers coming at them from all directions, and try and make sense of that. So building an ecosystem. So yeah, those are my sort of first thoughts on how we're addressing that challenge, Andy.
Thanks very much for that, Richard. I was interested in what you talked there about, the fact that you partner with organisations, obviously still compete with organisations, but increasingly partnering with organisations in this sphere as well. And I just wonder, we will maybe explore it in the conversation as well. But it's just interesting to see how digital is actually bringing organisations together as well, and maybe blurring boundaries a little bit. Also, it'd be interesting to hear what, I'm sure Mark's got some thoughts on that, knowing how Bentley systems work. But for the moment, Richard, thanks. We'll obviously return to you on a number of issues in the questions. Our next speaker is Emily Scoons, who's head of digital innovation for building services at Ramboll UK. Emily is someone who I know is very passionate about using technology to improve collaboration, decision making, and above all, deliver better outcomes for projects. She's got more than 6 years' experience of using her engineering knowledge in combination with digital design skills to create solutions that add real value to projects. And I think it's that marrying of the engineering rigor and the engineering skills with digital innovation, I think, which really unlocks the potential of technology within our sector. And I think that's where I think our, sectors, firms, both on the digital side and on the engineering and consultancy side, have got so much to offer clients and indeed society as far as that's concerned. Anyway, that's enough of the party political from me. Emily, over to you.
Thanks, Sandy, for that introduction, and hello to everyone on the call. I think from a sort of Ramboll perspective, and I think Richard mentioned in what he's saying that I think a lot of companies have been working towards sort of similar goals for a while, in regards to trying to increase productivity using technology to both optimize, automate parts of the process to make it easier and better to make, as you said, the kind of key decisions either early or throughout the project, which mean that we can add value and work better, work more efficiently, and also to explore options that we maybe potentially in the past haven't been able to reach because of time limits, constraints, whereas technology is starting to allow us to explore solution sets much further, much wider, and also import information from lots of different parties in order to get a way more holistic decision much earlier on in the design process than maybe was traditionally possible. And one of the great things that I think the industry is doing and that technology is enabling is allowing us to transcend our each individual disciplines and to start to at least be able to work more holistically, bring in information from lots of different parties. And even if you start off, so for myself, I started off as a structural engineer, actually be able to start to move more fluidly throughout the industry, apply your skills, apply your knowledge, and actually have a much more bigger overview of all the different aspects so that you can drive better decisions in the projects that you're creating. And I think that's one of the things that Ramboll has been looking at quite a lot, is also how do we start to develop the career paths and the environment which allows for both engineers but also potentially people from new industries or different domain expertise to come in and be able to work in an environment that has different domain expertise but also needing to create these hybrids, I guess is what we're calling them, in the middle, that enables that kind of communication between the different parties, blur those boundaries of domain expertise in order to really work together. I think a lot of what we're seeing is an increase of use of data, and Richard has already mentioned this. And I think the kind of step that we'd love to be able to see more of is not just to use kind of data to reuse it as part of projects, but actually start to drive decision making about the usage and how these projects go forward. How are the users using the projects that we create? How are they feeling in it? And how can we start to even increase the data above and beyond that our sort of collection of our BIM models, for example, to actually start to make sure we're creating places and infrastructure that's useful for the people that are actually using it. I think overall, as an industry, we are all wanting to move forward, and I think everyone knows where we want to be, and we know that things need to change, and we are more than capable. But I think there's a few key kind of elements that we need to do. Everyone can't do everything ourselves. We need to, look to partnerships, look to these startups that are coming in, look at new domain expertise in different industries who have been through some of the problems that we are facing now, and use that experience to mean that we're not reinventing the wheel in some of those challenges, and using those experiences to help us get further forward faster. I think that's a sort of key element, and part of those kind of blockers, and I think a lot of us have heard of them before, is around the sort of commercial and the procurement methods in this industry, which are kind of blocking some of the impact on the mindset that we have when we work on projects, which kind of helps to exacerbate this siloed mentality, helping it to exacerbate the kind of delivery ideal of what we're doing rather than looking at the outcomes of what a project could achieve. And what I think we need to do as an industry is to kind of tweak that and change that somehow. It's a big challenge. I'm not saying it's going to be solved overnight, but how can we do that to mean that we can work in more sort of agile ways of working, such as in software development, and allow for us to kind of communicate and collaborate with all different parties in a way that means that we can get to these better decisions and these better outcomes.
Thanks very much, Emily. Again, interesting to hear what you said there about developing different career paths to bring on board a wider variety of expertise, because it's clear that people are coming into consultancy firms, construction firms with skills that aren't necessarily traditional construction skills, but are absolutely vitally needed because of the digital agenda. I'm particularly interested in that kind of issue from the point of view of the whole recruitment and retention an attraction of the industry as well, because it seems to me that many people, the digital natives, that as they used to be called, but people who are really, sort of keen on working in that digital sphere, there could be a really good opportunity within the construction and infrastructure sector, because you're actually building stuff that's changing people's lives. I mean, what's better than that at the end of the day? And if you can do that by applying your digital expertise, then I would hope that we should be able to start attracting a layer of those people who might otherwise never even considered a career within our sector. But anyway, a lot of food for thought as well, and also what you said there about agile working and being fleet of foot. I think that's really interesting. How will that impact on the industry as a whole in terms of how it's actually seen? Anyway, a lot to chew on there, and we'll return to that in the discussion. Our next speaker is Mark Coates, who is actually the International Director of Public Policy and Advocacy at Bentley Systems, who are one of the leading software providers to many architecture, engineering, and construction firms on a global basis. Mark advises policymakers and business leaders on how to deliver better quality, more sustainable infrastructure projects through the use of digital. And I know that he works quite closely with some of their key stakeholders, including government policymakers, and other leading decision makers on a global basis on the benefits of digital transformation. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what Mark's got to say. Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Andy, and good morning, everybody. I suppose being third up, it doesn't leave a lot left to discuss. So, I mean, I suppose for myself, coming from both sides of the fence, being an ex-QS, delivering projects and then moving over to a solution provider, gives quite a unique perspective. And the one I really want to come at this from is, we've spoken many a time about it, and then I've spoken with Richard as well, is adoption. That, you can have all of these sort of fantastic solutions, but unless that adoption's there, you got a problem. I mean, the world of complex construction projects is becoming dominated by a growing volume of diverse technologies that vastly improve outcomes. However, advancing technology alone is not going to guarantee success. Today, we need to look at our roles, our leadership, our models. Both colleagues here, both speakers have said about collaboration. We collaborate on projects, but outside that project, we need to now start looking at collaborating as an industry. Government is being put under so much pressure internationally, not just the UK, of wanting to deliver more for less. That's not, a belt tightening or a political thing. Is we've just gone through one of the world's most prolific pandemics that we haven't seen in its like for such a long time, and money needs to be spent in accordance in relative areas. I mean, historically, many large capital projects deliver poor performance. And I think this week at the infrastructure, the Transforming Industry Performance event on Wednesday, they again highlighted that study shows that the outcomes of 70% of major infrastructure projects actually disappoint their owners. Despite continued extensive industry research behind these regions, these studies have to identify several cases of where it is, process systems failings, but that core is the leadership that gets behind it, that drives the adoption. So as Emily said, looking at greater skills and new skills entering the marketplace, they need to be nurtured. We're going to be bringing people in from outside the industry that need a construction background or need a sort of knowledge imparting it onto them. And that leadership with soft skills and bringing people in will actually drive our industry forward with the harness and the new available technology skills that are there, cementing that step forward. And again, both speakers have mentioned, looking outside our industry. We don't need to copy what other things are doing, like the automotive industry and how they're now adapting to electric vehicles. But we can take those lessons learned and those principles and practices and bring them in. They're not going to solve the problem day one, but they're actually going to help us move forward. And that again goes back to that earlier comment, leadership and adoption.
Thanks very much for that, Mark. Again, I think interesting that you alighted on the roles in the industry, that we have. Leadership, obviously leadership is vitally important. I've lost count of the number of conversations I've had on this issue where people talk about leadership. I mean, it's easy to say, but what does it actually mean in practice? And in fact, I'm going to kick off with that as a question, because it has come up in one way or another in all of the introductions. I mean, how do you view leadership in this kind of digital arena? What are the characteristics of good leadership? What does good leadership look like in relation to digital adoption, digital transformation? And if I start that with Richard, what's your thoughts on that, Richard?
I think what we're looking at for our senior leaders is to create an environment in which everybody through the organization can be digital leaders. So people demonstrate digital leadership when they make the effort to find out how to do something new, when they look for a new way of introducing, making their lives easier in many ways using technology, when they take a step forward. And there are many forces inside organizations which work against that. So particularly people who are just in the center of responsibility for delivery, where their responsibility is to get things done on time, on budget, and that's what they're being measured against. And they are very sensitive to getting out of a comfort zone, starting to do things in a new way, which they perceive as a potential risk to their project. And so there is quite a strong pull back to just do things the traditional way. I can remember right back to BIM days, really, when we started to try to get people to think about planning delivery in terms of model-based development. And, they just really could not think beyond, the number of drawings to be produced and what percentage of those drawings are finished. So encouraging people to become digital leaders in all parts of the organization really requires kind of things like recognition, celebration of efforts, giving people confidence, giving them the tools and the access to self-improvement. Our digital literacy program is really focused on the fact that people want to normally improve themselves. I mean, it's a kind of natural human characteristic, really, to want to improve yourself. So give them the environment in which they can do that, and the tools and the time to do so, and then show that recognition. So I think for our senior leaders, it's not about they need to suddenly, we do expect them to not make crass comments about, I'm too old for all this technology, that doesn't really go down very well. In terms of setting an example, we do expect them to be able to use the basic tools that they need to use to do their jobs, but we don't expect them to become digital native experts and so on, because they've got a lot of other things to do. But we do expect them to create that environment in which people right through the organization can demonstrate digital leadership in the context of their own roles.
Yeah, and just slightly putting a different spin on that to Emily. The new leaders of tomorrow, because of their grasp of technology, do you think that they will change the industry if given a chance by the leaders of today? In this, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I definitely think that if given the opportunity, there's definitely drive from this generation that are coming through that have all this digital technology. Not to say that the leaders that are here right now don't have that possibility also. And I think particularly clients have a big key role to play in this. Because I completely agree with what Richard said, and I think creating that time and that space, but also changing the way that we work in the sense of we don't want to follow these sort of more traditional project delivery routes anymore. To really push digital transformation, you require that investment up front. And that's a scary prospect on a project and more generally, because it is all at risk. But you start to see this kind of hockey stick effect where the benefits of it come later. And that's a slightly different model to what maybe we're more traditionally used to. But also the bit that's kind of forgotten sometimes is at the end of the project, this consolidation period of actually being able to take whatever's been developed and be able to share it or be able to manipulate it so that it's applicable to other projects. is something that I think often is forgotten, which means that tools and digital transformation gets to 80%, but never goes that final 20% to being fully adopted. And so I think, a mix of both the leaders that are here right now, but also the talent that is coming through with the difference of experience, expertise, different drivers, and that kind of range of diverse thought can actually really push the industry together.
Thanks, Emily, for that. Mark, in your experience and maybe with some of the clients that you work with on this question of leadership, do you see any difference between, shall we say, more established leaders and younger leaders coming through? Is there any difference, and how does that relate to what good leadership might look like?
Yeah, I mean, on that particular aspect, between an established and newer, there's a definite difference in risk averse, shall we say. The younger ones may be open to sort of challenging and trying and pushing the spectrum a little bit more than those that are well established, because they've got obviously a reputation as well. But this is where actually the leadership, I say, would actually goes a lot higher. I'm predominantly working at the moment. I've got a paper coming out next week where I've been working with the financial industry about the use of digital twins. That's where the leadership needs to come from, right at the top. That financial organization that's lending money on the assets can set the stimulus on where that leadership takes the digital roadmap. So therefore, that leadership at that level, which is outside of our marketplace, but will have a major impact on our own marketplace and our own industry, can really go. And that adoption and that leadership and that set of requirements actually then sets the level of the whole project. That gives up the ability to maybe take a step forward that may have not been done in the past. And the main thing there, and the core of all that, is that open sourceness. That everybody said it here: partnership, collaboration, having a database or a piece of software or a mindset that is open to collaborate actually gives you the results that you need. That Emily said that we work very much in particular parts of the project, but that project has a long legacy. 60 years, Thames Tideway, 125, 127 years. There is going to be other companies coming along afterwards, picking up crucial roles. And that open source mindset actually gives the ability to keep the innovation going forward throughout the lifespan of the asset. So it has different tiers and different stages. But to go back to your original question, we are seeing a difference between the younger and the more established businesses.
Thanks, Mark. I think one of the things around digital is that it has the potential, and it is changing the way the industry works. It's a great question in the chat from David Kennywell. I knew this would come up, and I'm going to ask it first to Richard and see what others think. From an engineering design consultancy point of view, are you seeing a shift away from billable hour-based revenue and perhaps towards a shift towards selling outcomes delivered digitally? Or will the billable hour survive digital transformation? What are you seeing in that area, Richard, and what's your view? And I'm going to ask that to everybody.
We're definitely seeing a shift. We're not quite at the stage of outcomes-based revenue. I think, because the measurement of the outcomes and the baseline issues are big challenges, but we are certainly at the point of delivering continuous value in a new way through really subscription type revenues, and we're beginning to see these come in. So if we typically, we might say an hours-based approach, we might do a very big report, I mentioned earlier, spend a lot of time, spend a lot of money. And when you do those reports, you gather lots of data and information together from various locations at a frozen point in time. You apply your domain expertise and your analysis to it. You produce some results and you give it out in some documented form. It might be sort of quasi-digital, but effectively it's just a snapshot. And those tend to deteriorate in value very quickly. If we could take that same approach, we're effectively taking all the data sources, including live data, performance data, condition data, other data, weather data, all kinds of different data, wire it all up together and actually interpret it with domain expertise or automated analytics and deliver decision support information to owners, operators in their roles that enable them to operate and the asset more effectively and connect it better to what its purpose is in the first place. Then you've got continuous value delivery, and then you are actually able to move on to a new type of business model, which is more like a subscription model, and the client's got permanent access to the value. We do tend to surround that with advisory, domain expertise, consultancy, which is still charged on an hourly basis, because we help the clients to interpret what they're seeing. We help them to make decisions about what that means they should do in terms of adjustments, alterations, interventions, and so on. So it's a kind of hybrid model. It's difficult at the moment because it's not really established as a category. So if you take the whole concept of marketing, the idea of a category, clients are buying in categories, and they've got people that buy things in categories, and that's what they do. There are very few clients who've got anybody who's buying subscription related or value-based services as a category. And so sometimes you start talking to them about this, they find it alien. They might start to think it's something for their IT people to sort of, because it's a software type thing. So they hand it over to IT on the procurement side, who really haven't got a clue, what you're talking about. I mean, they're great at IT, but they're not running the asset. So it's a very emerging early stage market, and it's very hard work. But I think it's inevitable that, we will be switching more towards value-based business models, which include subscription. But I think we're some way from the true outcome based, where I say, I'm going to, move X people from Y, or I'm going to make X people better, or whatever I'm going to do, and I'm going to get paid when that happens. That's the ultimate outcome, and I think that's some way off in the future. But yeah, value-based subscription, new business models is a live and happening thing, albeit pretty hard work.
Thanks, Richard. Emily, your thoughts on that? Are we still in the foothills of that kind of, sort of different way of working, and maybe there's something here around, really embedding digital and becoming a digital organization, really, where it permeates everything that you actually, that you actually do. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we're definitely in the sort of foothills, in the sort of early stages of the kind of adoption of this. But I think, it's definitely something that we should be moving away from, these kind of billable hours, because essentially as we adopt digital better and we're using it, it's essentially, in some cases, in some areas, becomes a race to the bottom with the use of digital things to automate some of the processes that we're doing. And that's just not representative, and kind of, from a kind of PR perspective of our industry, we add so much value to what we're doing, that actually, we shouldn't be selling ourselves short by just pricing on, how few hours can we put into it. It's actually about what is the value that we're adding, what is the outcome that we can create. So we're definitely have to take a bit of a journey to get there, and it's not going to happen overnight. There's a lot of sort of commercial and sort of mindset shifts that need to happen for it to be sort of fully adopted, but I think it is starting to move in that direction. I think the other kind of piece, and it's something that I mentioned earlier about kind of agile work methods, and especially at that early stage, often when clients don't necessarily understand the scopes that they want, and they have various risks obviously at that stage, but there's sort of difficulty in defining the scope because they don't know yet. That's at that point in the project, you have the sort of least amount of information, and you're basing a lot of decisions on that. And so what it ends up resulting in is sometimes these kind of generic reports that they may help, but they don't necessarily aren't project specific. And if we could shift to a bit more of a kind of agile way of working, where we're adding kind of value and creating price models around that maybe we can at that very early stage be investing a little bit more time, but coming up with better decisions at that early stage because we're working in a different kind of way.
Thanks for that, Mark. Your view on this, and also maybe reflect on this concept of a digital organization where it really permeates everything that the organization does, and it just becomes almost just another enabler to actually get the job done for the client. What's your view?
Yeah, I think, as both Richard and Emily said, it's definitely in the foothills, but it's definitely taking a stronger stance. And again, from outside the marketplace. I mean, I did some research 2020, and that change where we used to just be that, insight, complex project delivery, and then consultancy, and that was all nicely wrapped up. What is really emerging quite nicely, and working with a lot of clients on it, is this, and I'm going to use the word asset information management, and that is not your traditional stuff. It's more taking the data received from the actual asset itself around performance, but long term, and creating a very insightful perpetual loop. So actually, when you go back to clients and say, I delivered project X, but not only did I deliver and work on project X, I managed the outcomes for the last 10 years. And therefore, the insightful information that now sits in my staff, my team, my individuals on how to deliver the next project with, reduce emissions, reduce costs, greater insightfulness is really starting to bite. As I said, money is becoming tight. We've got some major investors now in the infrastructure market from overseas, especially Australia, Canada, who are now looking for that insightful knowledge, that way of working, of delivering a longer, better performing asset for higher returns. And that's where we're seeing and working with both, as I said, banks, insurance companies to reduce risk and liability, but also the major consultant and younger consultant companies as well, about how they take that open source data and actually are being paid. There's obviously the big issues of silo data and moving data. With it being open source, they can tap in and use their own integral BI, their own integral sort of knowledge that actually steps them out from the marketplace as being an industry leader, and that's being recognized. So it's growing, it's going to go definitely places, and there's a real new enthusiasm about it as well.
Thanks, Mark. You've all mentioned collaboration, and that's almost like sort of a leitmotif about working, with digital. It's obviously a key aspect. Are there any barriers that you can see in the sector that might impede collaborative working in this area? And I'm going to turn to Emily first with that question. And something that's just come into my mind at the same time about it is obviously we are a very contractual driven industry as well, and I just wonder whether or not current contracts are fit for purpose in this brave new world of digital. Emily.
Yeah, I think the biggest kind of blocker, and I mentioned it before, is the sort of commercial aspects and the way that projects are often set up, and a big part of that is IP. And Mark, you were mentioning about open source, and it is obviously it's a great ideal, and it's definitely something that should be worked towards. But there's a lot of companies in this industry that are built through their IP. It's their bread and butter. It's what gives them their business. Their magic is in that data, and so being able to share it is a difficult concept. And I think technology does allow us to facilitate some of that sharing a lot more easily now, which means that IP can stay in the separate parties, but the insight from it can be shared. So things, for example, APIs, etc., which means that softwares can talk to each other, or a lot more of these kind of workflows and round trips between, information models in one place and information models in another place, mean that we can still leverage the value, maybe not quite in the full open source quite yet, but technology does allow us to do it. So that is starting to kind of break down that blocker. But yeah, I think predominantly the kind of commercial IP contractual arrangements are the biggest thing that stops us right now.
If I can just
go on, Mark.
But just add to that, I mean, perfect answer, Emily, absolutely fantastic. What often I've seen is too many people see or too many people value the data. The data actually is not the thing that has the value. It's the insight that the data provides is where the true value sits. Historically, we can go look back at the having had so much data. That data is not actually going to predict the future. That data is going to give us an insight to what the future could possibly be. It's never going to be 100% accurate. I think that's where the definition needs to really fall. It's not the data has value, but it's the insight that has the greater value that people need to grasp and get hold of.
Well, I think that's a really good point. And also, if I might get on my soapbox again, insights are something that our sector is extremely good at, taking on board different information from different areas and then basically making a decision or giving advice to the client. So I think that's a really good point and should be one that encourages our sector no end from the point of view of, digital is providing a rich seam of information for engineers, consultants and other professionals in the industry to be able to do what they do best, which is actually provide that advice and insights. But just coming back to the collaboration piece, Richard, do you see any particular areas where maybe the sector isn't set up in the way that it should be? And also, what's your view of the contract situation? Are we getting around that? Is it an issue? Are they fit for purpose for the digital world?
I think there's a big opportunity for those people that create and operate contracts at a large scale to do more, particularly if you start to look at contracting from an information-centric point of view. Everybody has information to contribute to a project, and all participants. And at the moment, the way things are set up traditionally, that is a long way from being optimized. And modern methods of construction have brought this into focus, because there's a lot of contributions required in terms of information provision from manufacturers, fabricators, specialist contractors. In a way, there kind of always has been, but they've been brought in down the line through the traditional construction methodology. And quite often that expertise has been brought in kind of out of sequence. I come from an M&E background, and I can cite you hundreds of examples where, a consulting engineer has done a whole load of design, and then they've got into detail, which they don't even really understand, start drawing up complex things. And then as soon as the contractor comes on board, half of that is in the bin, because it's either the contractor wants to do it in a different way, or the way it was drawn up doesn't even actually quite work in the first place because of, the complexity of coordination and installation. And then they want to substitute in different solutions in terms of components and plant, because it's what they know or what they've got a good deal on. So it all goes out of sequence, and this leads to a massive deterioration in the ultimate quality of the end product in terms of poor access to maintenance and things sticking out where they're not supposed to stick out. I mean, that's a particular area, but there's quite a lot of examples across the whole industry. Everybody has information to contribute. So the ideal contracted arrangement would be that each party is contracted to provide the information that they are best positioned to provide in a sequence which runs through as a series of information transactions designed to support the decisions that need to be made along the way, from concept to budget to planning or to digging holes, whatever it is that needs to be done. So there's a great potential to build a contractual environment on the back of the kind of thinking around originally BS 1192 and ISO 9650, which nobody's really tackling. It's just sort of gets too big, but you can see the potential. Once you've got that, you could then really digitally validate that this information has been provided by the appropriate party, and then you get onto computable contracts and green fields down the line, sunny uplit pastures. But it's such a big challenge that I'm not convinced anybody's really taking it on. So there's a big opportunity, and somebody somewhere will take it on at some stage, I think. But what does work, I mean, I think in practical terms on the ground, certainly from a larger organization like Mott MacDonald, the thinking that was done with the kind of Project 13 and the infrastructure client group, this is still, being deployed. The way the contracts move around it and the different contracts that are used, some of them, NEC and others, they can be adapted to set up that enterprise approach. So there's really good work that has been done, and actually large scale, well, the Infrastructure Client Group is in the UK at least, most of the big organizations, they are actually aiming to implement that, and they're starting to realize that, last minute purchase of each supplier is not the best way, because you get out of sequence decision making, and they're starting to believe a little more in the benefit of that enterprise approach. So I think there's a lot of positives in that. Just, very briefly on this question of IP, we have a lot of trouble at the moment with clients thinking they want to take the IP of our digital solutions that we're providing to them, which, is a strange, really, because I mean, we've always done things under license, consulting engineers, if I design, I don't know, a bridge for a client in location X and I give them all the drawings, that is not handing over the IP. They never have had the right to go and build that bridge 100 times in 100 other places. It's always been, this is the license to use this design for this thing in this place. So why suddenly everything's being delivered digitally, they suddenly want to take the IP away, is a mystery to me. And I think that will unravel, and we will get clients back to the idea that it's a license to use, our digital technologies for the purpose that we're contracting for, not a handover of the entire IP of our organization to them. So, but I think there's a little bit way to run there, because it's just a bit of confusion, I think, really, and it's going to take a while to settle.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting, the client's view around that. And I want to move on to something now that digital is often talked about in terms of disruption and digital disruption, and will there be new disruptors coming into the marketplace? And there's been this kind of age-old debate about whether or not the disruptors will come from within. So organizations, like Mott's and like Ramboll, basically disrupting themselves almost to disrupt the industry, or are the people outside who are basically waiting in the wings to basically absolutely transform the whole shooting match, as it were? I'm not seeing that at the minute, but maybe I'm not looking hard enough. I mean, what's the view on that? I'm going to start with Mark on this concept of, where are the disruptors? Are they coming in? Are they going to make a massive difference to the way the industry works in the future?
I don't think there's one answer to that. I don't think there's one core. You've got disruptors from, we start at the top. So you've got clients, you've got some fantastic major projects, mega projects have been run just here in the UK, HS2, National Highways, who are running their own hackathons. So they're going out to the marketplace and they're looking for that digital disruption. And then, as you said, you've got Ramboll, you've got Mott's, they've got their own in-house skill set that's there. And then you've got the solution providers like Bentley, who are looking at obviously increasing their capabilities and solutions. So in all, I would say there's a lot going on. We're seeing a lot more hackathons taking place. I would say we're in that transitional period where we've had a number of them being done digitally. I'm not going to say if they've been successful or not. And now we're coming back to the more traditional, as you said right at the beginning, getting together again. And that sort of cross-pollination and cross-fertilization is really becoming a more desired and prevalent way of working. But there is definitely, sectors and sandboxes popping up left, right, and centre. So I'm definitely not disheartened. I'm actually very much enthused by the ability to, as an industry, for us to collaborate and bring this digital roadmap forward.
Emily, thanks, Mark. Emily, what are you seeing on that kind of disruptor angle, and is some of that coming into the sector either through individuals joining organisations or just some of these new methods being employed?
I sort of agree that it's coming from a few different angles. We have a lot of sort of these startups that are some in and some that have moved in from other industries that are disrupting the way that we work, and it's because they're smaller, they're more agile. But we're also seeing some of the big major players, starting to change their models, whether it be having investment arms or doing innovation accelerators or creating little startups within their corporates. There's a lot of evolution going on there, and I wouldn't be surprised if there is a few of those big kind of technology companies, Google, etc. They have, started to create little bits and inklings of wanting to move into the construction sector, particularly around kind of generative design, for example. And I think especially as we start to get more control of our data and start to use it a lot more, it starts to open the door for them to potentially try and move in a little bit more. But I think what they've maybe found is that the construction sector is very complicated. And so they haven't quite worked out their niche of how to move in yet. But I think there are a couple that are waiting in the wings, especially as data sustainability starts to become more, we become a bit more mature in those areas, particularly around the data piece. So yeah, I think a little bit from everywhere, but I think it's good that that's happening because, as I said before, not everyone can do everything, and each party that is coming in has different pros and cons and different advantages and disadvantages. The bit that we need to start working on is how do we connect all of these together so that we can partner with the small partnerships or the big data companies in order to mean that we're not all trying to compete in the same space. We can each add our value and use it together to kind of create those better outcomes.
And Richard, in common with many others, yours is an organisation that does have that kind of digital aspect to it. In fact, set up if not a separate disruptor, but you've certainly got that within Mott MacDonald. I mean, how is that changing the way that you work as an organisation? Is it seen entirely separate, or is it starting to make a difference on how you do things?
I think, there is an emerging model here, which is, works for us both internally and I think with other external organisations of all different kinds, which is, I think what my views will become established, which is this idea of a sort of an ecosystem model. So you've got lots of businesses who've all got their own business model and they're making their own money for their own reasons in their own way. And actually, if you look at how they come together in common interest, then each one kind of sticks to what it is good at. It may want to grow into new areas. It may want to expand. It may have imperial kind of aspirations, but in many cases the ecosystem model, it supports agility, it helps connect really huge organizations to much smaller organizations, it helps people to really focus on what is their actual business model and what is their actual capability, and if the ecosystem members recognize what the other party's interests are and work with that, then you start to get a really clear understanding and rapid acceleration. And we find this within our organization because, you can probably imagine, well, some of the listeners might not have a clear picture of what it's like in a large corporate, but basically it's lots of businesses, and some of the inter-business behaviors are, you might find surprising given that they're all part of the same sort of organization. But so you have to look at, there's a kind of what's the focus of each of the Mott MacDonald businesses and what's in their interests and how they're making their money. But you expand that out to a larger scale, and then I think that is the way the future model is looking, and it works both at large scale and small scale. We've got an arrangement like a very good understanding now, for example, with Microsoft. So Microsoft, their main model is to get traffic onto Azure, to build Azure, to get revenues on Azure transactions. That's just pretty clear. And a few years ago, I remember they were trying to they had a policy to try to get more and more cities to kind of sign up and get onto Azure and use Azure. So they actually started up a kind of quasi consultancy where they hired some experts and they went around the world and they started sort of selling like consultancy type services to cities. And we even found we were bumping into them and competing with them. And because they were never expecting this arm to make any money, then, they would go in and do loads of stuff for nothing and so on. And it was, it was a little bit bumpy. But when we finally struck up with them, the strategic agreement where they were perfectly clear that actually the only reason they were doing that was to drive traffic onto Azure, then they sort of have a policy now, ecosystem policy, where if they work with lots of people like us, and we like Azure because it's the best and we've chosen it because they're competing in the market and they've got a good product, then suddenly every time, you know, we go out to a client and we deploy our platform is actually built on Azure, then we're bringing business to them. And then they start talking about, oh, okay, well, yeah, so we're going to start to help you to sort of sell your solutions and introduce you to clients because they know that we're going to make money, but ultimately they're going to make money. And the same applies to startups. You know, we've got startup relationships where, you know, we help them to make money in their business model by hooking them up to client problems that we are aware of, and we can make those introductions. So the ecosystem model is really about focus, you know, on what your business objectives are, and then joining up businesses together in a way which is like a synergy where, you know, you're ultimately supplying the client need and the social outcome requirement, and you're all making money along the way, which is the kind of happy place to be.
Thanks, Richard. I just want to quickly quiz Emily on one thing briefly before asking a final question. You mentioned this concept of innovation accelerators. What do you mean by that?
Well, we did one in Ramboll, but I'm sure there are many that are both external. You can have internal and external ones, but I guess it's a sort of boot camp experience of how to start a startup or how to start a business. And actually it was really insightful. I was lucky enough to be part of some of it, and it's a really insightful sort of process of how to, you know, reframe a problem so that it is very client centric, it is very problem centric. I know I've been, you know, subject to this before, where I've, you know, thought of this cool piece of technology and I get lost a little bit down a rabbit hole. But what this really did help to do is to kind of, how do you test ideas? How do you bring them to market? How do you explore different business models? And how do you make sure that you don't invest millions of pounds, millions of hours of time for a solution that no one will actually buy or no one actually wants? They might think it's cool, but they don't actually want to buy it. It doesn't solve a need. And how do you kind of keep this process, which means that you are kind of lean in the way that you work, but are also creating the solution that's, you know, specific to that client or to the problem that's at hand?
Thanks. Just focusing on the stuff that people do want to buy and the stuff that will make a difference and it will be transformation. We've obviously seen all kinds of things, you know, come in via the whole kind of digital area. What do you all think will be potentially the next development around digital that has the potential to, you know, to make a real difference? Is the one on the horizon, or will it be, you know, kind of you know, more of the same, refining what we've got? What, you know, do you see something, you know, being, you know, coming in, being used that will really make the industry work differently? And if you can try and answer that in, you know, kind of a couple of sentences, and I'm going to kick that off first of all with Richard.
Couple of sentences, yeah. Well, the things I'm really looking forward to cheer Mark up. I mean, I'm looking forward to a much more sophisticated and easy to operate sort of data-centric approach to common data environments, you know, shifting on from where we are now as a file-based and quite complex to operate. So I see that coming down the line. That's going to be really good. And I think a platform which actually brings together lots of different things in an open way through secure API connections and so on, and can interpret data in lots of different ways that everybody can build on. You know, so you build your own solutions on some sort of common platform and you make your revenues off the back of that, and then there's a platform model underneath it, like a cloud model. I think those two things would be great.
Thanks a lot, Richard. Emily, your thoughts on that? Is there a next big thing? What do you see coming down the track?
I was probably going to choose the same too, you know, data and kind of looking at sort of operational pieces and how it links to people and places and how people are using it. And yeah, kind of central marketplace. There's already some popping up, for example, View City and various other things of, you know, at this very early stage, can we have these marketplaces which allow lots of different parties to link together to, you know, help clients to pick and choose what's most important to them and come up with better solutions earlier on in that piece. And I think as part of that, I think generative design is going to be a key part of that that's coming for that early stage.
Thanks, Emily. Mark, obviously there's a bit of a shopping list there lining up for Bentley Systems, but no, you know, your view on that.
I'd agree with both. I think that sort of Bentley did the brave move 2 years ago about going open source and providing an open source platform that people can work into. I know our own investment arm of Bentley is working with a lot of SMEs about that and letting them use the software to support major projects, because they have the ability to turn around quickly. And I think that the long-term aspiration, and hence there's so much solace in the open source aspect, is this system of systems. Digital twins, we're hearing more and more about it, placing more and more impact, and they need to be connected. The various ways and the IPAs we talked about. So that sort of, for me, that's the long-term aspirations of a system of systems, digital twin, but that core foundation at the bottom is the open source and ability to be compatible with others.
Thanks very much, Mark, and thanks very much to all of our speakers there for their insights on what I just find it a totally fascinating subject, and one that is definitely, undoubtedly, changing the way our industry works. It's also making it a more attractive industry to work in as well. And I think if we can build on that in the future, then we'll all be in a better place as far as the infrastructure and construction sector is concerned. So many thanks to Emily Scoons from Ramboll UK, to Richard Shannon from Mott MacDonald, and also to Mark Coates from Bentley Systems. Just a quick advertising plug for two forthcoming Infrastructure Intelligence Live events. Next week, we're with you all at the ungodly hour of 9 a.m. in the morning for a Making the Most of Offshore Wind webinar, which we've organised to celebrate Green Infrastructure Week. So do join us for that event and find out all about the government's plans to basically, I was almost going to paraphrase the Energy Minister, make us self-sufficient in offshore wind. I don't think they're quite going that far yet, but do join us for that. That's next Friday the 29th. And then the absolute must-attend event, Friday the 13th of May. We're not superstitious at all here at Infrastructure Intelligence. We have a Levelling Up and Social Value conference online. The second one we've done with a stellar lineup of speakers, almost as stellar as the lineup that we had today. So once again, thanks to all of our speakers. Thanks to everybody who joined us. Thanks to everyone watching again on YouTube. And thanks, as always, to our sponsors, BECG. Have a great weekend. I think the sun's going to shine, and we'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.